There are two kinds of leaders in the world, two kinds of companies, two kinds of people who try to convince you of something, sell you something, or inspire you to follow them somewhere. The first kind tells you what they do. They describe their product, their service, their qualifications, their features, their price. They give you facts and figures and comparisons and reasons. They appeal to your logic. They make a compelling, rational case. And sometimes it works. People buy, people follow, people comply. But they do not stay. They do not evangelize. They do not wake up in the morning feeling genuinely connected to what they are part of. They are customers. They are employees. They are not believers. The second kind starts somewhere completely different. Before they tell you what they do, before they tell you how they do it, they tell you why. Why they exist. Why they get out of bed in the morning. Why any of it matters, beyond making money or winning market share. And something remarkable happens when they do this. People do not just buy their products. They buy into their vision. They do not just work for their company. They feel like they belong to something. They do not just agree with their argument. They feel it, in their gut, in a way that no amount of data or logic could ever produce. The difference between these two kinds of leaders, these two kinds of organizations, is not resources. It is not talent. It is not timing or luck or market position. It is one thing. It is why. And in 2009, a man named Simon Sinek gave a TED Talk about this idea that became the second most watched TED Talk in history, with over 60 million views. He then expanded that idea into a book called Start With Why. And in the next 30 minutes, we are going to go through every major concept in that book in a way that is clear, practical, and genuinely transformative. Because this is not just a book about business. It is a book about what it means to lead. What it means to inspire. And what separates the organizations and the individuals who change the world from the ones who simply participate in it. Let us start with the observation that Sinek uses to open the entire book, because it raises a question that once you hear it, you cannot stop thinking about. Consider Apple. In the 1980s and 90s, Apple was a company that came very close to extinction. They were losing market share. Their products were being outsold. The conventional wisdom in the technology industry was that Apple was finished, and then something happened that defied every conventional explanation. Apple did not just recover. They became the most valuable company in the world. They created the iMac, the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad, products that did not just sell well, but became cultural phenomena. Products that people lined up around the block for, sometimes for days, in rain and cold, just to be among the first to own them. Why? The standard explanations do not hold up. Apple does not have access to better talent than its competitors. Microsoft, Dell, and Sony can hire brilliant engineers too. Apple does not have a superior manufacturing process. Their products are made in the same factories in China as many of their competitors. Apple does not have privileged access to better components, or better distribution, or better retail locations. By every conventional measure of competitive advantage, there is no reason Apple should have outperformed its competition as dramatically and as consistently as it has. So what is the explanation? Sinek's answer is elegant and profound. Apple starts with why, and almost everyone else starts with what. He uses a simple diagram to explain this. He calls it the golden circle. Draw 3 concentric circles, like a target. The outermost circle is labeled what. The middle circle is labeled how. And the innermost circle, the bullseye, is labeled why. Every organization on earth knows what they do. They can describe their products and services precisely. Most organizations also know how they do it. Their differentiating factors, their unique processes, their value proposition. But very few organizations and very few leaders can clearly articulate why they do what they do. And by why, Sinek does not mean profit. Profit is a result. Why means purpose, cause, belief. The reason the organization exists beyond making money. The thing that would still matter even if the money were removed from the equation. Most organizations communicate from the outside in. They start with what, move to how, and occasionally, awkwardly, try to say something about why. A typical technology company pitches itself something like this. We make great computers. They are beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. Want to buy one? That is a perfectly competent pitch. It is clear, it is accurate, it appeals to reason, and it might produce a sale, but it does not produce a believer. Now listen to how Apple actually communicates, filtered through Sinek's golden circle. Everything we do, we believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. The way we challenge the status quo is by making our products beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. And we happen to make great computers. Want to buy one? Same company, same products, same price, completely different message, and a completely different emotional effect. Because this version starts with why. It starts with belief, and when you communicate belief first, you reach a completely different part of the brain, producing a completely different kind of response. This is not a rhetorical trick. It is neuroscience. And Sinek spends a significant portion of the book explaining the biological basis for why starting with why works the way it does. The human brain is divided into three major components that correspond almost perfectly to the three layers of the golden circle. The outermost layer of the brain is called the neocortex. It is responsible for rational and analytical thought. It processes language, it handles facts, figures, logic, and features. When you communicate from the outside of the golden circle, when you lead with what and how, you are speaking directly to the neocortex. The rational brain processes the information. It can evaluate it. It can compare it. It can reach a logical conclusion. But it cannot drive behavior on its own. It cannot produce loyalty. It cannot produce the feeling that makes someone stand in line for 3 days to buy a phone. The middle two sections of the brain, taken together, are called the limbic brain. This is the part responsible for feelings, for trust, for loyalty, for gut decisions, for the sense of belonging, for the emotional responses that drive human behavior at the deepest level. The limbic brain has no capacity for language. It does not process words. It processes feelings. And here is the critical point. When you communicate from the inside of the golden circle, when you start with why, you are speaking directly to the limbic brain. You are bypassing the rational filter and going straight to the part of the brain that actually drives decisions. This is why, when someone makes a purchase or a career decision or a life choice that seems irrational from the outside, they often say something like, "It just felt right." They cannot fully explain it in words, because the decision was made in a part of the brain that does not have words. It was made in the limbic system, responding to a why that resonated at a level deeper than logic. Sinek argues that this is also why it is so hard to lead with logic alone. You can give people 100 rational reasons to buy your product, follow your vision, or support your cause. And they might comply. But compliance is not loyalty. Compliance is conditional. The moment a competitor offers a better price, a more convenient option, or a marginally superior feature, the compliant customer leaves. The believer stays. Because the believer is not following you for what you do. They are following you for what you believe. And belief, once established, is remarkably resistant to competitive pressure. Now let's talk about how this plays out in the marketplace. Sinek introduces a concept here that explains one of the most misunderstood phenomena in business and social change. He calls it the diffusion of innovation, built on the earlier work of sociologist Everett Rogers. Rogers identified that in any market, In any social movement, in any adoption of a new idea or technology, the population distributes itself across a bell curve. At the far left of the curve are the innovators. They represent roughly 2.5% of the population. They are the people who buy new technology before it is proven, who try new ideas before they are mainstream, who take risks on unproven concepts because the novelty itself excites them. Next come the early adopters, another 13.5%. These are the people who are open to new ideas, who are looking for an edge, who are willing to take a calculated risk on something new if it resonates with their worldview. Together, the innovators and early adopters represent about 16% of any market, and they are crucially, disproportionately important, because these are the people who, if you reach them, will spread the idea to everyone else. They are the connectors, the evangelists, the people who tell their friends and colleagues and followers about things they believe in. They are the ones who make things go mainstream. The challenge is that you cannot reach innovators and early adopters with rational arguments about features and benefits. These people are not waiting to be convinced by the best product. They are waiting to be inspired by the right belief. They are looking for organizations and leaders whose why matches their own. When they find that match, they do not just buy. They belong. They advocate. They recruit. They become the carriers of your idea into the broader market. Sinek calls the transition from early adopters to the early majority the tipping point. And he argues that the only way to cross it reliably is to inspire the innovators and early adopters so completely that they carry your message across the chasm on your behalf. You cannot advertise your way across it. You cannot feature your way across it. You can only inspire your way across it. He uses the example of the Wright brothers to make this vivid and historically concrete. In 1903, there was a race to build the first flying machine. The best funded, best credentialed, most publicly celebrated team in that race was led by Samuel Pierpont Langley. He had a grant from the War Department. He had connections at the Smithsonian Institution. He had assembled a team of the best engineers and scientists available. He had every advantage that money and prestige could provide. And he was racing against Orville and Wilbur Wright, two bicycle mechanics from Dayton, Ohio. No college education, no government funding, no formal engineering credentials, no public profile. The Wright brothers won. They achieved the first successful powered flight on December 17, 1903. And Langley, upon hearing the news, immediately quit. He did not redouble his efforts. He did not pivot his approach. He walked away. And Sinek asks, why? Why would a man with every conceivable advantage give up the moment he learned his competitors had succeeded? The answer is in the why. Langley wanted to be rich. He wanted to be famous. He wanted to win the race. His motivation was external. His goal was the outcome. When someone else achieved the outcome first, his reason for continuing evaporated. The Wright brothers, by contrast, were motivated by something completely different. They believed that if they could crack the problem of powered flight, it would change the world. They were not racing against Langley. They were pursuing a vision, and when they achieved it, they did not feel like they had beaten a competitor. They felt like they had contributed to something that mattered. This distinction, the external motivation versus the internal belief, shows up in every dimension of leadership and organizational behavior. The leader who is motivated by status and recognition will always be vulnerable to the moment when someone else gets more status or more recognition. The leader who is motivated by a genuine belief in what they are building is essentially immune to that pressure, because their why does not depend on external validation to remain compelling. Now let us talk about something that Sinek considers one of the most dangerous traps that successful organizations fall into. He calls it the split. The moment when an organization loses touch with its original why and begins to be driven primarily by what? And it almost always happens as a result of success rather than failure. He tells the story of Walmart. Sam Walton built Walmart with a clear and powerful why. He genuinely believed that ordinary working people deserved access to the same products that wealthy people could afford. He wanted to democratize consumption, to give everyone, regardless of income, access to quality goods at fair prices. That belief shaped every decision he made. It shaped the culture of the company. It shaped how employees were treated, how customers were served, how suppliers were negotiated with. It was alive in every corner of the organization because Sam Walton made it alive. And then Sam Walton died. And the people who took over the company understood the what and the how perfectly. They understood the operational excellence, the supply chain, the pricing strategies, the real estate model, but they had not inherited the why in the same visceral, personal way. And gradually, imperceptibly, Walmart began to optimize for profit and market share, rather than for the belief that had built it. The culture changed. The employee relationships changed. The public perception changed. The company became a target of criticism in ways that it never had been under Sam Walton. Not because the products changed, not because the prices changed, but because the why faded. And when the why fades, what is left is just a very large, very efficient machine, which is not the same thing as a great company. Sinek makes the same observation about Apple during the period when Steve Jobs was forced out of the company in 1985. Without Jobs, who was the living embodiment of Apple's why, the company drifted. Products became incremental. The culture became conventional. Market share collapsed. The company that had defined personal computing became an also-ran. And then Jobs came back in 1997. And almost immediately, everything changed. Not because he brought new technology, not because he changed the operational processes, but because he restored the why. He brought back the belief that had founded the company, and he made it the center of everything again. And the most remarkable corporate comeback in the history of American business followed directly from that restoration of purpose. The lesson is one of the most important in the book. The why must be actively, intentionally, continuously maintained. It does not sustain itself automatically. It requires leaders who embody it personally and make it visible in every decision they make. When those leaders are replaced by people who manage the what without understanding the why, the organization begins to hollow out from the inside. The numbers may look fine for years, but the culture is eroding. The loyalty is fading. And eventually, the results follow. Now let us talk about how organizations with a clear why build trust, and specifically about the role of culture in sustaining and spreading the why across an entire organization. Sinek introduces a concept he calls the celery test. He uses it to explain how a clear why helps organizations make better decisions. Imagine you are at a party and you tell people that your organization needs to improve. Various well-meaning advisors suggest different things. Someone tells you to try M&Ms. Someone else suggests Oreos. Someone suggests rice milk, and someone else suggests celery. All of these could theoretically be right. Without a clear why, you might try all of them. You go to the store and come home with a shopping cart full of M&Ms, Oreos, rice milk, and celery. You have spent a lot of money. You have confused your suppliers, and nobody looking at your cart can figure out what you stand for. But if you know your why, the filtering becomes automatic. If your why is about health and natural living, you go straight to the celery. Everything that does not fit the why gets filtered out automatically. You do not need a committee to evaluate every option. You do not need an elaborate decision-making framework. The why is the framework. It filters every decision through a single consistent lens. And the result is an organization that is coherent, that makes sense, that people inside and outside can understand and trust. This is what Sinek means when he talks about building a culture. Culture is not a set of perks or policies. It is not a mission statement on a wall. Culture is what happens when the why is internalized deeply enough by enough people that it starts to drive behavior automatically, without being told. When people in an organization share a genuine belief, they make aligned decisions independently. They treat customers in consistent ways. They hire people who fit. They reject opportunities that do not. The culture becomes self-reinforcing, and a self-reinforcing culture built around a genuine why is one of the most durable competitive advantages any organization can possess. He talks about Southwest Airlines as one of the most compelling examples of this. Southwest was built on a clear and powerful why. They believed that the freedom to fly should not be reserved for the wealthy. They wanted to democratize air travel, to give ordinary people access to the freedom of movement that had previously been available only to those who could afford expensive tickets. That belief shaped everything. It shaped the no-frills model. It shaped the customer service philosophy. It shaped how employees were hired and treated and empowered. It shaped the culture so completely that Southwest employees became famous for going above and beyond in ways that no policy could have mandated and no incentive structure could have produced. And critically, when Southwest faced competitive pressure, when other airlines tried to copy their pricing or their route structures or their operational model, they could not copy the culture, because the culture was not a product of the operational model. The operational model was a product of the culture, which was a product of the why. And you cannot copy someone's why. You can only develop your own. Now let us talk about the role of trust in leadership, because Sinek makes an argument here that is both counterintuitive and deeply important. He says that people do not follow leaders because they have to. People follow leaders because they want to, and the want comes from trust. And trust does not come from competence alone. It comes from believing that the leader is motivated by something beyond their own self-interest. He uses the example of great military leaders to make this concrete. In the military, the concept of eating last is both literal and symbolic. Junior officers eat before senior ones. The leaders eat last. And this simple ritual communicates something profound. It says that the well-being of the people comes before the comfort of the leader. It says that the leader's job is to serve the mission and protect the people, not to accumulate personal advantage. And when people believe this about their leader, genuinely believe it, they will follow that leader into situations that no rational incentive structure could ever motivate them to enter. He compares this to the most common leadership failure he sees in corporate settings. The leader who uses the organization as a vehicle for their own advancement, who takes credit when things go well and assigns blame when things go wrong, who manages up brilliantly while treating subordinates as tools, who communicates a why that sounds inspiring in a press release but is contradicted by every decision they make behind closed doors. People are not fooled by this for long. They may comply. They may perform adequately to keep their jobs, but they do not follow. They do not give discretionary effort. They do not innovate or take risks or go beyond what is required, because they do not trust that the leader's why is real. The authentic why, the why that is genuinely believed by the leader and consistently demonstrated through behavior, creates a completely different dynamic. It creates psychological safety. The feeling that if I take a risk and it does not work out, I will be supported rather than abandoned. The feeling that the leader has my back because they care about the mission, and I am part of the mission. That feeling of safety is the foundation of every high-performing team Sinek has ever studied, and it is always a product of a leader with a genuine, lived, visible why. He also makes an important distinction between manipulation and inspiration. Both can produce short-term behavior change. Manipulations, things like price reductions, fear appeals, social pressure, promotions, and peer pressure, can reliably drive people to take a specific action in a specific moment. But they do not build loyalty. They do not build trust. And every transaction has to be renegotiated. Every sale earned through a discount requires the next sale to be earned through another discount. Every employee retained through a higher salary requires the next retention conversation to involve an even higher salary. The cost of manipulation is that it never stops. You have to keep doing it, and eventually the cost becomes unsustainable. Inspiration is different. When you inspire people, when you reach them at the level of belief and identity, they do not need to be constantly incentivized. They are self-motivated. They hold themselves to a standard that exceeds what any manager could demand. They bring creativity and discretionary effort and genuine loyalty to the table because they want to, because what you are doing aligns with what they believe. Because they feel that being part of what you are building is an expression of who they are. Sinek makes this point about the relationship between Apple and its customers in a way that is both funny and revealing. He says that Apple users are not just customers. They are evangelists. They tell everyone they know about their Apple products. They defend Apple in arguments with almost religious fervor. They feel personally affronted when someone criticizes Apple. This is irrational behavior by any standard of consumer economics. People do not feel this way about their dishwasher, no matter how good it is. They feel this way about Apple because Apple does not sell them a product. Apple sells them a belief. And that belief, that the world is better when it is designed thoughtfully and when conventional thinking is challenged, is a belief they already hold. Apple simply gave them a way to express it. Now let us talk about what happens when a leader or an organization discovers their why, but fails to stay true to it. Sinek calls this the split between the why and the what, and he argues that it is one of the most common sources of organizational dysfunction, personal dissatisfaction, and leadership failure in the modern world. He uses the personal story of a successful entrepreneur he interviewed who had built a thriving business, achieved financial success beyond anything he had imagined, and was profoundly miserable. He had what everyone said he should want: money, recognition, influence, a growing organization, and he felt empty, like he was going through the motions of success without any of the fulfillment that success was supposed to bring. When Sinek worked with him to identify his original why, the belief that had driven him to start the business in the first place, they discovered that it had been buried under years of operational decisions, investor pressure, and market demands. The original why was still there, but the day-to-day reality of the business no longer reflected it. The man was leading a company that had drifted so far from his core belief that he no longer recognized it as his own creation. This story, in Sinek's telling, is not unusual. It is depressingly common, and it points to one of the most important practices a leader can maintain: the regular, honest, sometimes uncomfortable practice of asking whether what you are doing every day is still connected to why you started. Whether the decisions you are making reflect the belief that gave you your original energy and purpose. Whether the organization you are building is still an expression of something you genuinely care about. Or whether it has become a machine that you are running without knowing why. Now let us bring everything together. Because Start With Why is not ultimately a book about marketing or leadership strategy or organizational behavior, even though it illuminates all of those things. It is a book about human motivation at its deepest level. It is a book about the difference between doing something and believing in something, between compliance and commitment, between following and belonging. Here is what you take from this book. Every person and every organization has a what, the things you do, the products you make, the services you provide. Most also have a how, the distinctive ways you do what you do. But the ones who inspire, the ones who build movements and loyal communities and organizations that outlast any individual, always start with why. With the belief that drives everything else. With the reason that would still matter, even if the money and the recognition were removed. The golden circle is not a communication technique. It is a philosophy of leadership. When you start with why, you are not just changing the order of your pitch. You are changing the relationship between yourself and the people you are trying to reach. You are moving from a transactional relationship where you offer value and they offer money or compliance to an inspirational relationship where you share a belief and they share their loyalty. The limbic brain does not respond to logic. It responds to belief. And belief, communicated authentically and consistently, through every decision and every action and every word, builds the kind of trust that no competitive pressure can erode. The early adopters who carry your idea across the chasm are not waiting for the best product. They are waiting for the right belief. Find those people. Speak to their why, and they will do the work of spreading your vision that no marketing budget can replicate. The why must be genuine. You cannot fake it, not for long. People sense the split between what a leader says they believe and what their decisions reveal about what they actually believe. Authentic why is not a brand strategy. It is a personal conviction that shows up in behavior before it shows up in words. The leaders who have changed industries, built lasting institutions, and inspired genuine movements have always been people who believed so deeply in something that they could not pursue it. The belief was not a marketing decision. It was a personal truth, and that truth made every other decision easier, every sacrifice more acceptable, and every setback more survivable. Sinek ends the book with a challenge that is both simple and profound. He says that the goal is not to do business with everybody who needs what you have. The goal is to do business with people who believe what you believe. Not to hire people who simply have the skills you need, but to hire people who share the belief that drives everything you do. Not to sell to customers who can afford your product, but to find the people who feel that buying your product is an expression of who they are. When you build an organization on shared belief rather than shared transaction, something remarkable happens. The organization becomes more than the sum of its parts. It becomes a community. And communities do not just buy and sell. They protect each other. They advocate for each other. They build things together that none of them could have built alone. People do not buy what you do. They buy why you do it. And those who believe what you believe will not just be your customers and your employees. They will be your most powerful force for change in a world that desperately needs people and organizations with the courage to start with why. The question is not whether you have a why. Everyone does. The question is whether you know what yours is, whether you can say it clearly, whether you live it consistently, and whether you are brave enough to lead with it, even before the what is perfected, even before the how is figured out, even before anyone else believes it is possible. Because that is where every movement, every great company, and every meaningful life has always begun. Not with a plan, not with a product, with a belief, with a why, with the courage to say, this is what I believe, and I am going to act like it is true until the world catches up. Start with why, everything else follows.